Hello everyone and welcome to the 6th poetry critique class of the Steemitschool Poetry 100-Day Poetry Challenge. We are halfway through the challenge and it's time for another critique class. Some people will be late, so we will be starting a bit slower today. We are going to start with a piece by Live Russian, whose name is Katya. It was supposed to be the last piece last week, but we ran over time-wise, so we didn't get to it. So we are going to start today's lesson with it. She is also unable to attend class this week, but she did leave a critique comment, actually more than one, so all is well. Daniel, could you do us the honor of reading Katya's piece?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you put the link?
Yeah, I put it into the Steam
Ah,
School.
okay. I was still in general because I wanted to tell people that the class was beginning.
No problem.
Okay, Into the Sea. Pull it up. Okay, this is Into the Sea by Live Russian. So different we are and yet alike, branches of a whole and mighty trunk, that were dispersed with no permission to meet each other. Inhibition is our permanent condition. Breathing loneliness since we're taken apart piece by piece, bit by bit, and yet we fit as intelligence and wit. Eventually rivers flow into the sea.
Thank you, Daniel. Now we are going to take 1 minute to read it in quiet. Okay, Daniel, since it's you and me, we're going to take turns today. So would you prefer to go first or second with this piece? Until Tiger arrives and we have another person.
I'll go second
Okay.
to warm up.
Okay. Okay. First of all, in terms of editing critique, the second occasion of where, like breathing loneliness, sense where should have an apostrophe, or better yet, I would add, since we were taken apart, or we've been taken apart. I like the use of the word trunk here, because people don't use it enough to describe the tributaries of a river, but it is the correct word and it is also the correct image. And because she's speaking not just of she's speaking of, I feel, in also of bloodlines and genealogies, and the way you usually, like children or paint genealogies, is by method of charting out a tree. So I liked that. There's a bit of an issue with the rhymes. Like we have the third through the fifth line all rhyme. I think Katya might have missed that permission is also part of the rhyme, because she used the TION for inhibition and condition. And then we have fit and wit. I'm not so so it's so I'm not sure about that, but I can see it because look where she used her rhyming. The first occasion is speaking of what keeps us apart, and the second is how we come back together. So if it's intended, it's interesting, but the fact that it's inconsistent makes me wonder a bit, and like I'm unsure about it. I really like how eventually rivers flow into the sea, how she, like if you look at the shape of a poem, like this is a concrete poem that things collect, that they gather from a wider like from a wider delta into the mouth edge of a river, or the other way around if you want to look at it, from one narrow river or brook into the wider sea. You can look at this piece as looking at humanity as a whole, or as a family, or a couple. Inhibition is our permanent condition. Like, I think something in that line did not flow too well. Dispersed with no permission to meet each, like dispersed with no permission feels like it should be its own sentence, and I think like no permission to meet each other sort of detracts, and I would have one another instead. You could also look at it as a bit of a reference to the Tower of Babel, which caused us, which is like the no permission to meet one another. And she's speaking, inhibition is a permanent condition, does touch a bit on like how people feel uncomfortable bearing one another, because people, I have a saying I use, the only thing scarier than not being understood is being understood. People, if you look at it, actually resent being understood wholly. It's scary to think that someone else can understand us. So we also use this inhibition, what is called the porcupine dilemma, as a method of protecting our emotions. And I'm not sure about like bringing loneliness, since we were taking apart piece by piece, bit by bit. There should be a comma here after piece by piece. And yet we fit as intelligence and wit. I'm not sure, like that's a nice image, but there are intelligent people who are not witty, and there are witty people who are not intelligent. So I'm not sure how much I would say that these two fit. But I do think that overall this image is lovely. Lovelier in terms of formation and lightness. That would be my take on the piece. And Daniel, now it's your turn.
Okay. So first of all, I do agree, and I snagged at that line, breathing loneliness, since I think it was going towards breathing loneliness since we were taken apart. It could be just we're. In any case, there needs some type of fix there. And then as far as the permission inhibition condition, I also think maybe that was unintentional with the first one. It didn't bother me too much insofar as I kind of felt like inhibition and condition rhyming kind of drove home the point that this is a sort of pattern that we're ingrained into because of the rhyming pattern. I'm not sure how intentional it was. Bit by bit, and yet we fit as intelligence and wit did bother me a little bit with all of the rhymes. But at the same time, I do like how there's these, everything on that line is one syllable, bit by bit, and yet we fit. It's very like choppy, which is kind of an image of putting a puzzle together. Being dispersed with no permission to meet each other. For some reason, it struck me as odd when I was listening to Guy explain it. It started to make more sense. Because my thought was, it's not that we have no permission, because we can meet each other, but more so, like it struck me somehow as maybe the incorrect term for what you were trying to say, but but it may have been what you were trying to say. And then with the whole conclusion, eventually rivers flow into the sea. I like it. I just want to point out that with these type of conclusions to poems, I feel like it's oftentimes a double-edged sword, and you just have to decide what you're going for. With this type of conclusion, it pretty much lays it all out there for you. It very much summarizes everything up in a tight package.
Which I critiqued you on in your latest in the poem you gave me to critique this week, but I
Hmm.
think in this piece it works. Um,
Yeah,
because
I don't mind it.
yeah,
Yeah,
also because it's like this short,
it's
and the
short. Yeah.
title of the piece, like
Hmm.
I think also the point here is that she actually doesn't say it before this line. This sentence is the one that actually says it. Like if you look at
Hmm.
the, like it's not like pieces that actually say show it and then spell it out. Here it actually does the work because there are no there is no there is no mention of the sea of or rivers before this line either. Like this line actually changes
Yeah,
the
they're just
imagery.
implied.
Yeah,
They're just implied from the
the
whole
title.
image of the trunk and the branches. Yeah,
No,
it's
but
never
that could
stated.
also be like you could think of it as a tree before here
Well,
or something else.
maybe,
But yeah, but
except for the title. Yeah.
yeah, but that's what yeah, but like in this case, I feel like this sentence actually does work, like new work. I mean, unlike the problem in many such closing lines.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that it doesn't work. I was just saying I think that you
Yeah.
have to make sure you know if that's what you're wanting in your conclusion of your piece, or
Mhm.
just to, know that
Yes,
it's an
definitely,
option.
definitely.
Even with a piece like this, like I still think it's an option to choose how you want to conclude it. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else specific. I for some reason didn't get completely satisfied by the kind of, well, pre-conclusion to this. Like we fit as intelligence and wit. Not that it felt rhyme led, it didn't, but it's like after presenting this kind of condition of being dispersed with inhibition and loneliness, I didn't feel completely satisfied with, intelligence and wit being described as the things that kind of sew us back together. But I did really like the piece, and I think that's all I had to say.
Okay, anyone else wants to go over Katya's piece, Into the Sea? Before we move on, Katya is not here, so it's guaranteed that she will not respond, even though she's a good person, so she wouldn't have jumped in anyway. Anyone? Yeah.
Just a few comments to it. When it comes to the intelligence and wit, Guy, you said that intelligence and wit are not don't always have to be together. I don't think that's what she was implying. She's just saying that intelligence and wit fit very well together, are aesthetically pleasing when they both meet. I think that's what she meant by that. And when it comes to this, and I'm really like conflicted on this whole no permission inhibition condition thing, because like in the first reading it sort of snags, but like if you get into the flow of it sort of is a little bit ingenious if she meant it to be this way. It's definitely unconventional because it's not like a real, or it's sort of like a rhyme but not a rhyme. It's like it's because it's like
It
sort
is
of,
a rhyme. It is
it is a
exactly a
rhyme,
rhyme.
but what I'm trying to say is it's not okay, the sentence doesn't end in the rhyme. It's sort of like she breaks up the sentence weirdly, but it's sort of like
That's actually
it's like a weave of something,
but that's actually pretty common, including in the pieces we've read this week, or even Childer Roland to the Dark Tower came. Um, in more classical poetry, it's actually the norm, I would say.
But I just, as I said, I think if it's intentional, it is ingenious, especially because it's not her mother tongue, to sort of like weave it like that. Because at least we forget this is what her second or third poem that she's written in her life at all, and for that, I think the quality is really good, and that's all I have to say to that.
I think the quality is quite good regardless of like
No, but I mean, especially because it's the beginning of
yeah,
her
but
work. You know what I mean?
yeah, but like even and if I but it's important for me like to say that if it were only good for her third poem, I think like that would like and saying this is good for where you are at. This is not the class we're at. Like the class we're at is looking at the poems as they are. So I understand what you're saying, but like
Yeah, you think it could be interpreted as it being a value judgment when I am just saying that it shows raw talent. So, but do you think that it could be misinterpreted as a
I
value,
I think
as a value
I
judgment
think
of
it
her
comes
poem?
off as a backhanded compliment, as it's good for someone for whom this
Oh
is.
no, it's not what I mean. What I
Yeah,
mean
I
is,
know.
is
No,
that
I know. And I'm saying that even more than that, if the poem is lacking, but is good for someone's third attempt, we still need to point out why that it is lacking, because otherwise, this is how people don't improve. If you tell them that they are fine when it's not fine, but that's not the talk for now. So, okay, we are going to go over Steve's poem next. Steve linked it. I'll repost it. Dana, it's your turn again because Steve can't actually speak.
No problem. Pull it up. Okay, I was kind of excited to look at this one because I saw that he was using it
By
was
the
a
way,
little different.
I wanted Steve, something to keep in mind. We talked about it yesterday when we weren't here. People can pick the poems they want to be talked of the most. It doesn't have to be your newest one. So, like, I'm just like, there's nothing wrong with asking us to look over your latest one, but I'm just saying it as a general point. You can even like share a poem from 4 or 5 months ago or from a year
Yeah.
ago if you wish.
I'm thinking of not today, but I'm thinking of doing that. Looking at us looking at a really old piece of mine, because I think there will be a lot of things to say. But yeah, let's look at this. It's called "For of the Women I Am Called" by Acoustic Stevo. The sun dost cast the rays of men upon the spiraling earth, and of those some may grab a pen to work its light to birth the many vacant fantasies that die inside their heads, the laureates of softer things before they're laid to bed. I implored these men to know the gifts that sing them to delight, forever questing with my sword to meet them in the night. I greedily, uncannily beseech them for the truth. They tell me, do not come away before the night of youth, for in her darkness they do swim, then lay upon her shore, the light forever caving in their eyes forevermore. And dreams do catch the moon's lament, but they just chuckle on into the breast of cinnamon, into the breast of dawn. I know her, I say, I know her. They say too, she is the one I give my life. They nod and bid adieu. I know the reason she weeps on and on into the night. I've heard her lovelorn brokenness, her weeping stars are blight. She is the hallow, kissing mist that sits upon my cheek. She is the salty fountain of individuality. For of the women I am called to hear their voices sound, and of their merriment I will be forever being found. For they find me, unlike the men who sort me to the side. They find me and let me know I do not have to hide.
And we are going to take a minute now to read it in quiet. Yes, and I was also going to suggest that Tiger will go first because otherwise she's going to implode because she too lacks some patience, even though she is often quick to note it in other people. Go ahead, Tiger.
Hello, Pot. That being said, yes, it's just because I was really excited on this one. I really love this piece. However, I have a few things I want to say on the third stanza when the individuality, the sentence saying she is the salty fountain of individuality. I feel that it just sort of like the first two stanzas I think are completely perfect the way they are, at least in my opinion. Somebody may say it differently, but
Yes.
I feel that they're perfect the way they are. However, when it comes to the third one, this last sentence, she is the salty fountain of individuality, I feel it breaks the flow, the word individuality, although it wasn't as bad when Daniel read it. So maybe it's just the way I'm reading it. But I would definitely, I don't know, maybe try to find a different word for that. The stanza I'm having the most problems with is the last one. Not the conclusion of it, but that the first sentence, for the woman I am called to hear their voices sound, and of their merriment I will be forever being found. It's just it seems like it's clunky for some reason. Like it's like it's the stuffing in the forever being found there. I don't know if okay, great. My brain is now freezing because I'm being recorded. That's great.
You are always being recorded in our brains.
It's not the point. It's me in stage fright. That's why I also record stuff often instead of doing it live. That being said, I'm not quite sure how I would change that. I would probably rewrite that whole sentence and try to find something that's approximation of that sentence, because I love the classic feel of this, and I also love the message that it's sending. But I really feel that sentence is basically ruining that last thing for me. And
Tiger doesn't want to say, but she feels it's crap.
I didn't say that.
That's what you said.
The sentence.
Yeah, the sentence, I'm saying.
Yeah, the sentence, yeah. But otherwise, I absolutely love the piece, and I'm going to hide now because right now my brain is mush. I do apologize.
Okay, Daniel, you're up. And notice you hadn't gone first this time either.
Oh, that's very nice. Oh, the joy.
And Hazem, nothing gets cut from my recordings. They go up as they are.
Yeah, so first thing, just on some editing critique, you need to say the sun doth, because dost is actually for like thou for second person, right? Thou dost, and doth is for third person. So the sun doth cast the rays of men. Really like this piece. I've never seen you write in this sort of style before, and I have obviously kind of a weak spot for it. I really like antiquated type approach. It flowed really nice in general. I really like the first 4 lines. I read them several times to kind of see what it was saying, and I wouldn't change too much there. For some reason, the way that the second 4 were phrased kind of bothered me. The many vacant fantasies that die inside their heads. I almost was wanting it to say they are, they're laureates of softer things. But I mean, it is elucidated in the last sentence because it says before they're laid to bed. So it could be all right. Let's see. There was like something that I feel is like a strength and a potential weakness of this piece is that due to the fact that there's a very lilting quality and flow to it, there were times where the actual semantic meaning of what you were saying seemed very abstract, and that it was maybe there for the flow more so, but it was a bit unclear. And I'll try and pinpoint specific points if I can kind of remember any that I was thinking. the light forever caving in, their eyes forevermore, and dreams to catching his lament. I I like the idea of into the breast of cinnamon, but I couldn't really comprehend what this was a symbol for, or like it came off to me as just being put there just for the sound of it, more so than for the image. In any case, I couldn't tell what it was there for basically, but it was nice for the sound, but I
I
just
would
didn't
guess,
understand the image.
you know the term honey and spice to describe women sometimes. So this is the
Uh,
spice,
yeah.
or something to go along with spring and dawn, because
Hmm.
he's like I would say that the women he's speaking of in some sense it's day versus night.
I think more so than even the fact of not completely, and I could see that. Yeah, I mean that was the only thing that came to mind is just, representation of spice and a quite a earthy, strong spice as well. I think one reason why it stuck out to me, just to mention it, is it's really the first time in the poem that I saw any type of abstract image. So just pointing that out. And yeah, regarding the whole individuality thing, it's I'm torn on that because whenever I read it, like I've never looked at this piece before, but the way that it was formatted, it was given its own line, it's indented, it comes after an M dash. So I was forewarned that okay, here maybe comes a part that is intended to kind of make a impression and go against the grain of what's come before in a certain sense. So I was expecting something that would kind of break things up, and it did. So I'd say it's okay if it seemed like it might have been intentional, basically. Um, yeah, I also found the ending stanza probably the weakest part. And I can relate. It's really often hard to wrap up pieces like this that are sort of very romantic and smooth. You want to come up with a very good ending, and like what the way that the ending came off to me is that you were focusing on making sure that it was very smooth and ending up, but that it could have been a little clearer in saying what you were trying to say, which I did understand what you were trying to convey. It's just the way in which it was done, as far as the conveying forever being found, they find me unlike the men. For some reason, especially they find me unlike the men. I don't know.
It's
It
awkward.
seems like
Like when you read it now, you can sense that it's awkward.
yeah, yeah. I was trying to even think what you could say instead of unlike, some other type of comparison, but I couldn't think of one offhand. Anyway, really interesting to see you write in this style, and I what I admire about this piece is the message of what you're trying to convey. I felt came through despite anything that snagged. Personally, to me, it came across as very understandable. So that's what I have
Okay.
to say.
Anyone else wants to go before I go? Like there's not many people here who do tend to go, so I will go. Um, I don't like the Dost because it's that's the only place it appears. Where it's the only place where anything of this sort appears in this piece. So it's just a distraction. If you use something like this, it should actually, especially in the first line, it should somehow be seen in the rest of the piece, and it's not here. You used the M dash too much, including for multiple purposes, and even like in before individuality, it definitely doesn't belong. For those who did not notice the rhyming convention that Steve used, it's A, B, C, B. So the second and fourth line in each uh, collection of 4 rhymes, except for a couple of places where he's breaking this up. Usually, sadly, in the other way, like on cinnamon dawn is a triplet of lines that rhyme. Like cheek and individuality don't rhyme, but that's one of the places that it's very clear that it doesn't rhyme because he wanted it to come off as clearly not rhyming. But there was another place, I think, where I felt as if there were 3 lines that rhymed, but I can't find it now. But heads and bed, because you had the plural of head, also doesn't rhyme. I really don't like the use of individuality here. It breaks too many things up. Like, I'm fine with it breaking apart the rhyming because you wanted to break the rhyming here. But it's too much of a mouthful. It's too loose from the rest of the poem. She's the salty fountain of, like, I'm sorry, but that's just not very good. I do like salty fountain. The immediate imagery that some people would think of is tears, but I see it as being the ocean of life or blood, which is another like metaphor. Another reason that the sea is tied to be a metaphor for life is because it's salty like blood is. You have a line, I greedily, uncannily beseech them. That I would definitely cut the word uncannily because it doesn't belong here. Uncannily is for things that you observe, or you can say unfailingly beseech them. In general, this is something that I've spoken about with Elaine quite a bit. It's really hard to make dialogue tags work. I would strongly recommend people to not use them and just use, like, I say that I know her. I think like using reported speech works much better for poetry. It just breaks things apart. It's in the third stanza, the way that you break apart several sentences by the same person while he's speaking with the dialogue marks is mistake. You should have it go from I know the reason she weeps on and on into the night until I do not have to hide. It should all be a single dialogue tag. I would have to say that Daniel started talking about why the final stanza is not good enough, and the reason is that you actually need to finish this poem on a bang. You don't, and you could somewhat get there if you changed the period after hide to an exclamation mark. Even though I generally don't believe in exclamation marks, that would have been an improvement. The final stanza does feel as if it's somewhat rhyme-led. Who thought me to the side, maybe push me to the side. If I found the whole piece to be relatively abstract, unlike Daniel. It's full of relatively concrete imagery, but the entire thing as a whole is abstract. Is it a love letter to the sun? Is it a chastisement of men? I think this piece needs to be tightened up. There's nothing that is outright wrong with it. I just think there's a bit of fat that needs to be cut, and as Daniel said, the message needs to come through stronger. For in darkness they do swim, then lay upon her shore. Here you also switching the meaning of youth from youth as a thing, as a concept, and the youth that they do come and swim. The light for here's also something that bugged me. The light forever caving in, their eyes forevermore. You've used the word forever twice in a single sentence, and it's a bit much. And dreams do catch the moon's lament. That I really did like. I also didn't care for the breast of cinnamon, even if I can see what it means, but I think that you also have to like pick an image here. You go between the men who don't pay attention to the woman in the singular that laments and cries on, and then you move to women in plural. I think like this piece needs, like you need to identify what is the core message and then cut off everything that is not that core message and then add from there, because here I feel like the imagery overtook the poem, so its actual meaning and the way the imagery connects between sun, moon, day, night, men and women, like as you notice, that's too much. That's too many things. And the actual meaning sort of got lost along the way. Steve, do you want to type something or hop on for a second? If you are here.
I just want to say thank you guys. That's about it. Thanks.
Okay. You are most welcome, Steve. And I guess that means anyone wants to reply. Tiger, do you want to reply to what I wrote?
To what you said, yeah, just the last thing that I'm not quite sure that I generally agree with some of the stuff you said, but definitely the last thing you said, that you think that it's too much in the poem. You're a very linear person, so I can see why that bothers you, but I actually liked the different angles. I'm somebody who thinks like that as well, like who sees like different layers of stuff. So I enjoyed it actually, but then I think
I want to say that you totally mischaracterize me. Like I think in ways of associations, and I do like poems that go about a clear message from multiple angles. I just think that he actually is not clear what his poem is. I think the poem is not clear what it's about because it's, I think what I'm saying is that the too many images don't mesh up, don't gel up to a bigger concrete whole. That's my issue. Not that
so you're saying you're saying you want him to refine that, to either cut it out or to bring it together. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. That I understand. Okay, I misunderstood you. Then I apologize.
I wanted to comment on that too, because that kind of put a light bulb going off for me. Like why I said it came through to me is because, and why the end came off as sort of weak is I felt like I understood what he was intending the core message to be at the end. You know, the women, or this kind of feminine, the divine feminine kind of force, and it's like how it's epitomized here, and what it brings so uniquely. But I didn't feel like if that was what was intended, I did not feel like that was made clear throughout the piece. And I also agree with Tiger. It could be, you could have all these different things. As you mentioned, there's so many different images and seems like scenes or intentions in the piece, but for me, they failed to mesh together. So I wouldn't say they'd have to be cut, but if they weren't cut, then there would need to be some work in kind of weaving them together more deftly, I think. And it would, the more images and the more angles of something you show, then kind of
less
the more
is
difficult
more.
it is. Yeah.
Less is more. Less is
agree.
more is one of the meta rules that I do tend to agree with. All else being equal, sometimes you do need more, but you have to be really careful. Okay, so Daniel, Tiger, if you've seen my pieces, I'm really not minimalist, but it's just that I think less is more, and like that's a saying
I'm
of
just
mine.
poking you. I am
I know.
poking you.
Okay, Daniel, do you want to put forth Yahia's piece. Link it.
Yep, let me get the link.
Yahia generally does not attend these classes, but he does leave, for those listening in, an assortment of comments in general. And this is, I see, is a published poem of his. For those who don't know, Yahia is a published poet, but as we've gone over, we've critiqued Shelley Percy. That someone is published does not mean that they are free of our critique. Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, and I guess I could have just said that so everyone can hear on the recording. He said he was traveling today, so he couldn't make it to the class, but he was going to check out our recording. So pretty excited to look at this.
I actually speak to him and he listens to all the recordings.
Oh, okay. Nice. So this is called What Do Animals Dream by Yahia Lababidi. Do they dream of past lives and unlived dreams, unspeakably human or unimaginably bestial? Do they struggle to catch in their slumber what is too slippery for the fingers of day? Are there subtle nocturnal intimations to illuminate their undreaming hours? Are they haunted by specters of regret? Do they visit their dead in drowsy gratitude? Or are they revisited by their crimes, transcribed in tantalizing hieroglyphs? Do they retrace the outline of their wounds or dream of transformation instead? Do they tug at obstinate knots, inassimilable longings and thwarted strivings? Are there agitations, upheavals, or mutinies against their perceived selves or fate? Are they free of strengths and weaknesses peculiar to horse, deer, bird, goat, snake, lamb, or lion? Are they ever neither animal nor human, but creature and being? Do they have holy moments of understanding deep in the seat of their entity? Do they experience their existence more fully, relieved of the burden of wakefulness? Do they suspect, with poets, that all we see or seem is but a dream within a dream? Or is it merely a small dying, a little taste of nothingness that gathers in their mouths?
And now we are going to take a minute to read this piece on our own. Okay, Daniel, you are going first.
I'm not surprised.
Well, you said that you didn't want to go first the first time, and then we had Tiger, so it only makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, so with this, and knowing Yahia a bit, many of these come off as very aphoristic, and some of them to me were like, if I look at this piece as a stream, some of them were just at a gentle slope, and then some of them were more like really tumbling downward off a rock, and they were more, I would say, angular, or even intentionally paradoxical. So I will state that this is kind of a piece that I would normally take longer to look at each couplet. So it looks like there's, maybe 15 or so couplets here. And of course, they're all in the form of questions. The punctuation is the same throughout. So right off the bat, there's it's very pleasing in the fact that there's a lot of different, just going on the actual, structure of things. There's a lot of different line lengths, but there's a very consistent capitalization and punctuation scheme that the first line of each couplet is capitalized, and then there's a question, and the second one is not, because it's just a continuation of the phrase, and then there's a question mark.
I'm actually going to ask you here, specifically you, because you are the voice of caring about aesthetics in this class. Why do you think of them as couplets? I see here 14 single lines that, for reasons of, like, you could just there is no comma anywhere here, there is no break. These are 14 sentences. Why do you think of them as couplets?
Because, good question. I think because, at least in some of them, there is no comma, you're correct. But a lot of the line, not all of the line breaks, but a lot of the line breaks come at points that after the line break, there's often, I would say, a twist, or you're not quite sure what's going to come after it. It's not that it's a complete thought, but that is a good question, because sometimes I'll read things that are in these type of formats, and I'll say it's really not a couplet. It comes off. For me, they didn't come off as just 14 sentences.
I'm just going to point it out, though, even though I'm skipping my light a bit. An example: the fourth couplet should have a comma between the first and second line, because unlike or maybe a semicolon. Yeah, but like that place, like it's inconsistent with the rest. And also the last one.
Is that the only one?
No, the last one as well.
Yeah.
Like those are the only two.
Okay. Yeah, good eye.
And go ahead. Go.
Yeah, so this piece is interesting, kind of tackling both seriously and I think maybe almost tongue-in-cheek, the kind of anthropomorphization that humans are prone to do towards everything, and especially with something, living that has some degree of emotion, feeling, that dreams. Like an animal, it's sort of kind of in our nature to wonder what their experience is. One of the things that stuck out to me was tantalizing hieroglyphs. That's quite interesting and makes me think of anthropomorphization, because I think for us humans, our symbols and our images and our concepts can become very tantalizing for us. So I'm trying to understand how much of the piece is intended to be not humorous, but
I don't think it's humorous at all.
It's not humorous, but what am I trying to say? Why can't I think of the word? A question that is asked, knowing the answer. Rhetorical.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much of this is rhetorical.
After Tiger will have her go, because she is going after you, she now knows. I will actually have a question to ask you people, to everyone listening to this class. But do you have anything more to say, Daniel? Like, what do you think, let's say, of how do you like the writing in this poem? Is there something here you don't like? Remember, this is a critique class. I know we are here, but we're critical of everyone here.
Yeah.
I always like his work. I think he has very beautiful way of writing. However, I don't always like his message, which sometimes he and I clash about. But and when it comes to this poem specifically, I feel that it's
Tiger. Daniel might not be done yet.
I'm sorry. I thought you were asking us.
I asked Daniel.
Oh, I thought you meant all of us.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, can you repeat the question? Just
are there things in particular,
other things that I don't like?
Yeah, or word choices in particular that you do like or interest you, like tantalizing hieroglyphs? Like, are there things you don't like in this piece that you think could use shoring up?
Like a lot of times when things stick out to me and I mention them, like tantalizing hieroglyphs, I could be a little more clear because usually when things stick out to me, it can be either a good or a bad thing. Like that, when I looked at that phrase, I was questioning it. So I'm not sure if it's good, bad. It's kind of like that part it stuck out to me. I guess all I would say is I would question if all of them were needed as for the meaning, or if it was kind of a matter of wanting to have it be lengthy enough to kind of conjure this rumination that it seems like you're trying to create in the reader. Of course, I think that the second to last two lines, I mean, it feels like the climax of the piece to me.
Which
Do
one?
they suspect with poets that all we see or seem, and sorry, my screen just turned off because I didn't, okay. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. That one came off as the kind of pinnacle, and I was almost wishing that some of the others may have been as clear, because like one of Yahia's strength is this kind of like how he weaves things in a way that balances abstraction, melody, and meaning. And I was almost wanting more of those ones that are so simple and powerful. Like I liked holy moments of understanding deep in the seat of their entity. These sort of ones kind of contrasted well, say with one of the ones like, are there subtle nocturnal intimations to illuminate their undreaming hours? This is more kind of intense. So I found those refreshing, any of the ones that were more simple. Like, are they ever neither animal nor human, but creature and being? But at the same time, that one particularly struck me as confusing, or one that was intended to be confusing so that you could, kind of ponder over it. Yeah, there's a lot here. I think that's what comes off
Okay.
at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Tiger, it's finally your turn. You get to say everything you have in mind now.
I'm so sorry. I really thought you were asking everybody.
No problem. You don't need to apologize. I just moderated you. Go ahead.
I know, I just feel bad. Well, as I said, I always love Yahira's work. I mean, and that way I'm actually really a fangirl, although we sometimes, clash when it comes to message. I think this is like a case of like when you often say like the poem says more about the person than it does than about the subject. I think this applies to this poem. Yahia is a person that is very much in search of the meaning of all things. So I think that reflects a lot in this poem itself, but it also reflects into what I feel. Even though it's questioning what animals feel or think, I think that he has a very set opinion on that, and that becomes clear in some of the subtle hints in it. I think that he does think that animals are not capable of a wider depth of thinking in that way, or into there's like sort of subtle little things saying, in there. But what I found interesting is that I think he does believe that animals are able to understand something about crime, because, okay, there you go again, rambling. I found it interesting that he said, why if animals were basically retracing their crimes, and I personally believe that animals basically are above that kind of judgment because they don't act upon that way. But I feel that he actually meant that he actually thinks that animals do have the capacity of accumulating sin, but as I said, it might be just my interpretation of this and maybe completely off. Like Daniel, I feel that the last sentence that was in there might have been just one too much. That I think that really the second to last, like Daniel, I do believe that's
The
actually
penultimate one.
it would have been a really nice conclusion to it. So I think the last sentence was not really, didn't really need to be there. And when it comes to the hieroglyphs, yeah, I mean, a lot of the other sentences are very plausible in their own way. Animals do have their approximation. When it comes to the hieroglyph sentence, I feel that this one is like the epitome of the
Anthropomorphization.
Thank you. of things, because animals don't deal in that kind of way with language or writing it down. However, I guess an equivalent of that could be scents and shapes, but all in all, I think that the hieroglyph one, even though it's a pretty image, that's a sentence I might have also omitted out of the whole poem, because everything else seems very cohesive in itself. So that one and the last sentence I probably would have cut out, but everything else I really loved, and I really do love his work.
Okay, anyone else wants to comment on this piece? Anyone? Hazem, Steve, do you have something to say on Yehia's piece? I'm asking if you want to comment on the piece, Hazem. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question to everyone who is listening to class, even the people at home. Here's I think you guys are wrong, but rather than explain how, I'm going to ask you questions that will force you to revisit the piece, and I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, because it's the sort of thing that I should ask and then give you 10 to 15 minutes to ponder about, but we just don't have that sort of time. But here are 3 questions. First, do you really think this piece is about animals at all? Second, what is this piece saying rather than asking? Third, how many real questions are in this piece? Daniel, I know that I'm putting you under the spotlight, but try to tackle those questions. What do you, especially the big one, what is this piece saying? Because this piece is saying things, it's not just asking questions.
Right. Yeah, I don't think most of it is questions. I think it's formatted that way in order to make the reader try and get the reader to come to conclusions that the author already has a lot of ideas on. And I do think it's possible that it's not about animals at all.
And I'm going to lead you a bit. If it's not about animals and it's saying things, what is it saying, and about whom?
I think it's about humans more so, and I think it's questioning the line between mortality and not mortality and immortality, but it's just questioning. I think it seems to be questioning the position of humans as a mediator between what could be called the higher and the lower.
The divine and the hellish.
The divine
and the base.
Yes. Yeah, it's exploring that. It's almost reminds me of when we were looking at the metals poem that really wasn't about metals. And so the animal's dream, I do think the more that I was looking at it, that it's using this as more of a canvas of an exploration. And I think as far as what it's saying, I still hold that the second to last couplet is the most emphatic. It says, all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. and the other ones are exploring different aspects. Like, that basically makes it more meta than it was before. Before, you just think of, you know, you picture everything that has to do with dreaming, so all the seemingly non sequitur, the abstractions, the all the transformations and the volatility, as well as the processing of daily life. But then that line takes it to the next level and kind of questions the layers of this and what is the actual import of it. Like, for me, it doesn't come off as nihilistic. I don't think that that's the point, being a dream within a dream. But I think it's showing that the meaning of it is subtle.
However, a dream within a dream is idealistic, not nihilistic. It says that the world is in our minds, not necessarily real. A nihilist says there is nothing, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else wants to have a go at answering my questions?
Yes, I'll go, but just say them one at a time, and I'll answer them one at a time. So question number one was, I think that it's about animals? And my answer to that is, as I said from the beginning, it says more. This poem says more about the person than what it's depicting.
You mean the
what
person
I mean
here?
I mean himself, yes. I think that this poem has to do with animals, but I think these questions are also questions that he asked himself, or he often asks himself about himself. So I think it's a deeply personal poem, actually, and it's about himself and not humanity as a whole. But it also does, I think, talk about animals, but the main thing is animals as, how do you call it? A whiteboard, a whiteboard, basically to bounce himself off of. So basically, like, he's using it to reflect it back on himself, reflect more clarity on himself, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think you are getting there.
So that's what I meant when I said it says more about the person itself than the material he's discussing. What was the second question?
The second question is, how many questions do you think were actually in this poem?
Probably just the last, the second to last one.
Okay, and what is the poem saying if there is only one question here? Because everything else is then not a question. What is it saying?
It is saying that nothing is as it seems, and reality is make of it in a certain way.
No, not what the question is asking. What are the other lines saying? Like, what are the other lines saying? All those other lines.
All those other lines is trying to find out what reality really is, or what his existence really is, or what everything means. It's all the quest to find out what is this all about. At least to me, that's what it comes. What is the meaning of everything? 42.
Okay.
Question number 3.
Question number 3. No, I did ask you. What do you think this poem is saying?
Okay, so that was all to put together. All right.
Okay, could I just say one thing, because I forgot to address the second.
You can go
part.
As many times as you want before I go.
Yeah, I actually, like, just because there's so many questions here, I was trying to look at each one by one, and this, even though that this seems like the pinnacle still to me, being a dream within a dream, that seems more, it seems the least like a question to me, because it seems the most declarative. Actually, the one that comes off the most as being questioning is
the last line.
Well, okay, let me look at that one. Yes, I agree. The one I was looking at, though, was, are they ever neither animal nor human, but creature and being? Like, that one, I'm sure someone could disagree, but that one to me comes off as, because the other ones, if you read them, it comes off as that he's had some experience of this, like, he's experienced being free of strengths and weaknesses peculiar to, you know, the different forms. And all the other ones, if read it, ask yourself, is this something that's been experienced? But then at the same time, maybe that could, but for some reason, this one came off as the most questioning to me. Maybe the last line as well, yeah.
So, Guy, you're saying that the last one is saying that last one is the question, and that would turn
Well,
the whole
I'm going
thing
to talk about. There are 3 questions in this poem.
Right. Okay.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just-
But first of all, this poem is about humanity as a whole, and so why is he going to the animals? Because the moment that he asks, do animals do X, Y, Z, what he is saying is, humans do. These are all the things that we know humans do, and now we wonder if animals also do them, because there wouldn't be much of an interest, you know, asking whether, like, all the things here are things that we do. He's talking about, you know, about revisiting our crimes, about being tantalizing by the imagery of dreams, being haunted by specters of regret, about joys as well, but there's less other agitations, upheavals, or mutinies against their perceived selves or fate. That's what we all go through when we ask ourselves, who are we? There's much less happiness and joy in this, but this is like a piece that is basically saying to be human is to constantly retrace your steps, even when you don't want to, even in your even in your dreams, so to speak. But like it's constantly revisiting who you are, asking yourself who you are, and he's using the animals here as something to throw it off of. The 3 questions are indeed, are they ever neither animal nor human, but creature and being? He's asking here 2 questions specifically in this line. That is actually a question on animals and the relationship to the divine, like are they like us? And we too are not humans, but just being. And he's also still asking this about people. Are people actually divine? Are they actually base, or are they just simply being? The other 2 questions are the last 2 couplets that are sort of, he's asking 2 questions that are about the same thing. Is everything we see not real, or just like, or perhaps dreams are as real as our waking world, because this is a dream and this is a dream, so what does it matter? Or do we just experience nothing when we sleep? So the last one is definitely like the most of the question. There's a reason he ends with that and doesn't just put it elsewhere. Or is it merely a small... He's asking, when we sleep, do we actually explore the world? Do we actually... Or are we just dying a bit? Dying from the waking world, which is also a dream and reality. And those are the questions I see him asking, and this is how he's using all the prior so-called questions. He's using animals to reflect on humanity, because he's saying if it's a question about animals, it's because it's clear about people, until he comes to the last 2 couplets where he questions that. And like I would question why he chose, for example, poets and not philosophers, but here because he's a poet, and you know that whoever wrote it is a poet, he's telling you what he's suspecting. He's telling you that it's not necessarily real. And if I'm going to talk, there are a couple of commas that I feel are like break the order of that. 2 couplets are different than the others, but I understand why he didn't put the commas in, because it would break the read of it. But I still think like there's, for a person, usually 10 to 12 words are how much it's comfortable to read, and poetry books tend to be narrower than normal books, but most of this could have easily been written as a single sentence. I still think it's poetic, and the thing as a whole is poetry, but like I don't necessarily think that the form of couplets, though it's aesthetically pleasing, was necessary. The one thing I did not like was this couplet. Are they free of strengths and weaknesses peculiar to horse, deer, bird, goat, snake, lamb, or lion? Because that's a laundry list and it's not interesting. It's just like Daniel asked if he actually needed all those questions. I think he did need all those questions, especially because having all of them and the absence of joy here is important. Like everything here is about burdens. He's not asking. He's asking he's asking, is everyone else also burdened as I am when they try to sleep? But I don't think we needed this list of animals. I think this was excessive. Now that I've had my go, does anyone want to say something about my read? Do you agree, disagree? Do you agree that it's a good read but still don't think it's the only read? Anything before we move on?
The latter, I think it's a good read, but not necessarily the only read, because I do think that this poem was deeply personal. When it comes to the horse, deer, bird, goat, snake, lamb, or lion, I do see where you're coming from, but I also feel like he's trying to give them respect in a way of their different cultures, because a horse has a different culture than a deer, and a bird has a different culture than a goat. They
but I'm asking, do you need
traditions.
to have like the 7 or so, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? He listed 7. I'm saying, couldn't it have been like 3 animals to make the point?
Maybe, yeah. But I mean, it doesn't bother me as it bothers you. I just see it as him trying to give them, give them a certain respect, say, of their differences.
And by the way, I definitely did not say it's not personal. The poet's work is to take the personal experience and make it reachable to everyone. The poet's job, I think I said it in a prior class, is to take the personal and turn it into the universal, or the universal into the personal. So I definitely think that he's asking, like, the fact that he's not using anything resembling joy here is definitely like a personal thing. So, but I do think that he's talking about humanity through his place as a human. Daniel, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I did snag on that line when I read the long list of animals, and it did strike me as being a bit out. I think I know what he was trying to do there, and I think it would be more than 3. It does need to be several, but nevertheless. And then there's one other thing that, oh yes, one thing I've noticed with Yahia's work is, since you mentioned, he could have said with philosophers. I've noticed that Yahia tends to use poet, and I'm sure this is the case with many people, in the way that he sees a poet, which is kind of the combination of a philosopher, a mystic, and a writer and an artist, all in one. Because when I'm reading this line, it actually seems like it would be the most accurate to say, like philosophers is long, so I don't think that would, I think it would be too long, but maybe like, do they suspect with mystics? Like I'm seeing this as a mystic poet, I think that's all I had to say. I enjoyed your read, for sure.
And
so you, one more thing you were saying. So you're saying that basically, like, the animal is the reflection of the poet reflecting on himself. He is then for the reflection on humanity.
it's not that simple. Like, when a poet writes, they should, like, yes, I'm speaking of it as if it's a rule, and I'm fine with this case. When I write a personal poem, I'm not speaking just of my experience. I'm trying to speak of all people's experience. And when I write an abstract poem, I'm trying to talk not only of the universal, but also of the personal. And I think that's what I think that the distinction between the personal and humanity, when one is a poet, is a false dichotomy and actively harmful to how you read or write poetry. You need to think of them as interrelated.
I agree.
Daniel, your poem is next.
Okay.
Yes, Steve. Steve. Steve said and then quit.
All right. I just wanted to point out a couple things. Did anybody else notice that the poem name was similar to a Philip K. Dick science fiction story?
Sort of, yes. Yes, do sheep dream of electric, of androids?
Do androids
Yeah,
dream
I'm
of
not
electric?
Yeah,
sure
do androids,
that was,
yeah, do, yeah, oh, yeah.
I'm thinking that may have been done on purpose. Maybe not, but it's something to think about. And also, perhaps a lot of those animals might be astrological animals. Now, I didn't get a chance to read it. I just listened to it, so I can't remember every
They
animal.
aren't. Goat, for instance. Wait, it's a deer, but what is bird? Bird is a bit. There is no bird.
The eagle is Scorpio.
Well, and some of them are like obvious symbolic pairs, like the lamb and the lion. You know,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah.
But I couldn't
Yeah,
catch the relations with the other
it was
ones.
cool, but there's the ram, which could be the lamb, and the lion's obviously Leo. And it's probably a stretch, but I thought I'd throw it out
I
there.
think it's a stretch,
I
especially.
was trying to discern that too, but like, what would deer be? Then?
No, and bird. And I
Yeah.
think if you wanted it to be the astrological, he's still missing.
Deer is Celtic astrology, but I don't think
Uh,
that
yeah,
it has
I-
anything to do with astrology.
Yeah, he, especially not Celtic astrology. And if he wanted astrology, he would have also mentioned fish, which you note he hadn't, because there's Pisces. Yeah, so, but
I think it's called Pisces.
Pisces, yeah. By the way, yeah, this reminds me one thing I wanted to point out. It's interesting that the title of the poem is actually its first line, because you can't actually read this. If you read this poem without the title, it doesn't start properly. Like, do they dream of past lives and untold dreams?
Yeah, and this is a
Yeah.
style of titling that I find very strong, and this is why I have to disagree with people that find titles completely pointless, because if they're done well, then they're actually necessary to the piece, and they add something that is unique
Yeah.
and
Okay.
even needed.
Okay. And now we are moving swiftly to Daniel's piece.
Okay, and I have promised at some point that we'll look at something older, but for now,
But not
I'm
today.
gonna do this one. Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, Daniel, I'm giving you an option because you've read everyone else's piece. So I'll read your piece if you want.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. And there's a certain reason why I picked this piece, so I think it will be fun.
Okay. Take it
Yeah, go
from the
ahead.
top. I'm going to take it from the top now. Take it from the top by Daniel Pendergraft, aka Deep End, not the diaper. And again, this time less elaborate. This time with greater feeling. This time clearer, more abstract. Again and again, under than over. Frivolity weighed against heft. A searing screenplay carrying exigencies of fire behind manila leads. Graphite, pixels, saline. Work with a medium at hand. This time, with endless agony. This time, with vigor, billowing hope trailing a gown of diaphanous vapor. Streamlined canticle in flesh, rising up from its pyramid of lime. Again calcium, again magnesium, iridium, gold. Solve et coagula. Biochemical sophistry, sad monolith. This time, self-actualize on cue. Visit the interior of the earth in order to rectify what is discovered in darkness. Once more, de novo, simpler, with greater thrust. And now we are going to read it in quiet for a minute or two. Okay. Solve et coagula, concentrate and dissolve. De novo means, let's look at it to be sure that I'm not. De novo is of new, which means a Latin expression used in English to mean from the beginning or from the top, as he's doing it here. Who wants to go first? Tiger, it's your turn. You don't have a choice.
Why do you do this to me?
Because it's only us two right now.
Okay. I'm asking myself if he's talking about the writing process. But that might be my projection. It's just that I know that it's been like something that's been in his mind because of, all our thumping Thursdays.
And I actually commented on it, I think, last time we had a piece of Daniel's, but all of his pieces that he brings to class could also be read as if they are on the process of writing.
Yeah. But it's because it's like this time less elaborate, greater feeling because you had said, put more of your feeling in there. This time clearer, but then maybe more abstract. Frivolity weighed against heft, so playfulness weighed against more substance. So for me, it reads like he's talking about the creation process of his writing. So that's what I get from this, and his sort of struggle of trying to find, the best narrative at this point. I'm
going to ask you a couple of leading questions.
Yes, please.
Look at the images he used. So those listening in at home, they are sort of a psychedelic, fractal, hallucinogenic imagery, and try to combine it with solve et coagula, which means dissolve then concentrate, and pyramid of lime. Again calcium, again magnesium, iridium, gold. I think that my read of a piece, or I think those things are there for a reason in this piece. Try to rein them in.
Oh, you're confusing me because it's like yes, it's like a sculpture, but creating words or creating writing can be like a sculpture made out of thought. So I'm not quite sure what you're trying to get at, but I also am having brain freeze again. So
yeah, okay, so Hazem, do you want to tell us what you think this is about? Yes, this is your chance to shine, Hazem. Come on. Put yourself out there. Be brave. And Nerdikim, if you're here, this is also a chance for you to say something. You're usually quite a chatterbox. And he's gone. Okay.
I'll say one more thing. I guess deconstructing and reconstructing, and then basically like in alchemy, bringing it down to the best possible end product. There we go.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to go. I feel that this piece is about reincarnation, whether actual reincarnation of a spirits going from one lifetime to another, or from the metaphorical reincarnation of reinventing his own self. Lime is interesting here because lime was used to get rid of corpses in the past, to sort of melt them away. It's again calcium, magnesium, iridium, gold. It's sort of talking of what people are sort of made of. This time self-actualize on cue. He's talking about reform yourself when someone demands it of you. He's talking about how we constantly have to reform for changes in our psyche, for changes in our lives, for changes in our surroundings. Like, if you look at the first stanza, like all of us, more X, more Y, what does he end it with? A searing screenplay. That's what it's about. He's talking about a lifetime. All of these are about a lifetime. And then, from the lifetime, he's saying, have another lifetime. Have another play in your life. I, again, don't like the use of the ampersand for again and again. It's really not necessary, and you have to stop using that, Daniel. I don't like the use of the M dash between clearer to more abstract, because you are using M dashes in contradictory means here and there. Graphite pixel saline, he's talking again about use your life. Like, saline is about blood. And yeah, so that's how I read this piece. There were a couple of lines I didn't like. Biochemical sophistry, sad monolith. I have to say, that's very cute in the bad way of saying cute. That's like what kids think is poetry, you know, just having like this non sequitur of sort. And biochemical sophistry is sort of a weak image, but I get what it means. It's talking about how we try to justify things to meanings. But sad monolith, come on, sad monolith is way over the top here. And I'm really not a fan of using the Latin phrases here. I think it detracts, especially when your title is take it from the top. You should have just said once more, take it from the top, instead of the de novo. I could understand the solve et coagula because it is like a technical term, but de novo here was, I think, sort of inexcusable to me, indefensible. Okay, try to defend it, Daniel.
No, it sounds good. I'm not going to get too on the defense. I brought this one in because I feel like it could be improved.
Mm-hmm. But
So
do tell,
but
but what, so in your cases, because your pieces are so abstract, I do demand. So what is this piece meant to be about?
yeah, your read on it was definitely pretty much accurate. I wouldn't have summed it up with saying reincarnation, but that's one way of saying it. You know, it's about creation and recreation, and how repetitive and yet ever new it is, and how it's a balance between things. You have frivolity weighted against heft, and you're correct. You know, your life, you know, everything being a screenplay, and you're correct about the graphite pixel saline images. What else were we talking about? Oh, you were correct about, you know, calcium, magnesium, iridium, gold. These are components of us, with calcium and magnesium being complementary minerals, calcium being a more male or yang mineral, and magnesium being more feminine. I did study on my own some biochemistry, so you'll see this crop up occasionally from just what I know. Iridium and gold are trace minerals, and they have to do with higher consciousness, typically.
By the way,
see,
I
what
just want
else?
to say, in Western occultism, gold is seen as the sun and male metal, as opposed to silver, which is the feminine one.
Yeah, that's one of the symbols of gold for sure. And then I agree with you about, I do think solve et coagula is important, because it's more than just a Latin phrase. It's a alchemical phrase, and it's one that alchemists of all nations recite in Latin specifically. You wouldn't just translate this to, it's something like say
Yeah, it's
the
a
word
technical
amen.
term, as I said.
Yeah, but de novo, I agree with you, could be certainly removed. Did you have any other questions that I didn't
No,
answer? Okay.
no.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for going over it. And man, we'll see. I hope we don't have to agree to disagree on, because I really like the ampersand here. I like how it looks so much more.
No, but I actually
Yeah.
think that, aside from the fact that I think it looks wrong, I think it will free you if you care a bit less about the looks of your poetry. If like like I don't want to change your poetic voice, but I don't think the look of a poem is actually important to its voice, and I think a focus on it. You know how some things are rhyme-led? You could end, and in the past I did comment to you that I feel you'd change some things to fit the form. So, if it fits on its own, then great, but like I think it's something that you need to like be wary of a bit. I'm not sure which poem of mine to share. This one is probably the one most in need of like work. This one has the most specific imagery that you actually have to get to understand it, and this one is the best, so maybe needs the least. You know what? I'm going to share this one. I'm not going to tell you which is which, but we are going to share I'm going to share a poem of mine. Well, Elaine still has things to Tiger said in chat, I like it though I know I'm the idiot child, but I hate end. Like meaning the ampersand. I'm not going to read that. Daniel said Elaine stated that he likes the use of ampersand too. And Elaine also has issues with going a bit too much for form over function, which I've beaten him over the head with a bit. So this is a piece of mine that you people are going to have the joy of critiquing. I linked it. Its name is Revolution. I'm going to say something before. I'm actually going to explain a bit the word revolution because I'm bugged by how it's used. Revolution means that something comes again, not that something changes. Say goodbye to the old king, say hello to the new king, just like the old king. That's revolution. Revolution. I've broken this shell, and now I'm out there, naked. I hope they won't see me, just you. This unprotected flesh, a sanguine bit of red flesh. I hope they won't touch me, just you. And yet, every so often, without a touch, without a glance, I shatter. The wounds of decades, the yoke of my self-imprisonment can be seen, not for you. The weight of disregard, the yoke of my fragile feelings can be felt, not for you. And yet, every so often, still free, still feeling, I shatter. You come like daybreak, you leave like a winter storm, and I live, and I die, hinging on your revolution. And now we are going to take a minute to read it again in quiet. Okay, who volunteers to go first?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so what sticks with me with this piece is, and I was just dissecting kind of the just you and not for you. And with each of your pieces that I read, I kind of comprehend the sort of aesthetic quality as well as the semantic way that you develop things. And what I noticed is that you're fond of finding ways to hammer an image home in a way that's not too obvious, but still like this unprotected flesh, a sanguine beat of red flesh. This is kind of drilling the image home each time. And you hope they won't see you. I hope they won't see me, just you. I hope they won't touch me, just you. But even without them seeing or touching, you still shatter. And it's left me wondering, because then it goes on to explain what is becoming bare, what is becoming made plain of yours that was previously hidden. Wounds, yoke of my self-imprisonment, weight of my disregard, fragile feelings. And it says not for you. And this leaves me wondering, because it's interesting, because it's a poem talking about bearing yourself, bearing your soul, but at the same time, it says not for you. So I'm wondering if there's a reticence here that even though that these things are being made evident, that there's still a sort of, not insecurity, but a sort of fear, but of actually giving these kind of vulnerabilities.
And I'm going to ask a bit of a leading question. How are not for you different? Like in the form.
Say it again.
Look at the poem.
Mm-hmm.
The hanging lines are just you, I shatter, and not for you. How does not for you differ?
Well, it's in parentheses, which I find fascinating because I've heard you state many times that you generally don't like parentheses in poetry.
Yes.
So I know that you're doing something very specific there, but I haven't completely understood.
I'm not saying that I agree with your reading or not, because that would be cheating. I'm saying that if I agreed that the sort of reticence that you want to share but not could also be seen that I'm saying it, but like in parentheses, as if I'm trying to hide it.
Yeah, that's true.
As if trying to hide the sentiment.
Yeah, and then I find fascinating because not for you occurs twice, as just you occurs twice, and shatter occurs in the middle, as far as
it also
occurs
twice.
And at the end, yeah, after as well. But after the second not for you, I find this stanza very fascinating. And yet every so often, still free, still feeling, I shatter. That one actually confused me a bit. Although it's so simple, that one, for some reason, was the least clear part of it from my reading. Probably because of how tight your poems are in general. Like, you come like daybreak, you leave like a winter storm. It's made very clear, and so I was a bit, I wouldn't say snag, because it's not that it broke any sort of flow, it's just that I found that part unclear. And then I live and I die hinging on your revolution. This is very interesting that actually stating the revolution doesn't come in until the very end, but seeing what you said about thinking about the actual meaning of revolution as opposed to just the connotations that people have with the term, it's...
Yeah, that's also why I used, for those at home, the image I chose for this poem is Atlas carrying the world on his shoulder. And if you look at what revolution, like the term revolution as we know it came from astronomy.
Revolve, yeah.
Yes, and also like like someone is Daniel, you're clicking.
It's my neighbor is walking on their
I
floor.
I see.
I'll mute. I'll mute.
So it's also like the origin of the term as we know it comes from Copernicus, the Copernican revolution, but he changed how we see it to us revolving around the sun. So if you look at it like that, daybreak is also a symbol of like also requires revolution, and so do the seasons. Not saying that I meant them to be the symbols of the revolution, but I'm pointing it out. As for the and yet every so often still free, still feeling I shatter, I would ask you a leading question before I will let Tiger speak as well. Why do people shatter? And how can you see it as opposite to still free, still feeling? Like I think that answers.
I think things shatter whenever they're brittle.
And would you describe a person who is brittle as a person who's full of feeling or a person who's unfeeling?
Yeah, maybe even brittle is not the proper term because there's kind of connotations there of brittle meaning that you're delicate. But I mean
rigid.
Rigid.
Yes.
Rigid, exactly.
Yeah,
Something shatters when it's rigid, like a tree that's very old and about to die in the wind. It just shatters, whereas
so
a young tree.
So here is if still feeling means like
right. So it might be saying that
even though
I'm trying so much and that I feel so bared, it's still there's some part of me that's so rigid. I still shatter.
Yes, because if you notice, and yet every so often also repeats twice, and yet every so often without a touch, without a glance, and here and yet every so often. So that leads. Okay. I know I shouldn't like break it up, but here it's like just understanding the words because there's and yet still free, still feeling. Okay, Tiger, you up.
Yes, you basically gave all the meaning to it, but I saw that line a little differently, at least in my interpretation. Because,
which line?
Wait a minute. And yet ever so often still free. I shatter. I interpreted it as that you're feeling, but you're still free because you were unclaimed, and that being unclaimed because there's the person of your affection, but there has not been a conclusive contract of sorts, and that's why you shatter. But that was, I guess, just my personal interpretation of that. Then when it comes and you come like daybreak, you leave like a winter storm. I interpreted that piece as like when she comes, it warms your life, and when she leaves, it basically turns everything to winter. But so I pretty much saw with the parenthèse as I saw the same thing, that basically you admitted to yourself that you're basically it comes back to the thing that you said, that people want to be seen, but you don't want to be seen, so that you want to bear like the emotion of everything and show that you do need this warmth and this person and this commitment and this special relationship, but you don't want to show how far you have been hurt by the world or by this feeling of being isolated from other people. So that, you want to be seen, but you don't want to have that, what you feel as ugly or defected or like defective to be seen. That's what I saw in that. And then the last line is like, I live and die hinging on your revolution. You said it has to do with, the classical sense of the revolving around, but I had actually sort of interpreted it as everything that happens in your life from that point will basically stand upon either the sealing of the contract or it just staying the way it is, where it's not 100% confirmed. That was sort of what I saw in that.
Anyone else wants to go? Anyone has editing critique to give? Because we've only given me impressionistic.
I do.
Go ahead, Steve.
I only have one thing, and I really like things that, you know how people say this snagged? For me, that's not a bad thing, but there was one thing that did snag, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the not for yous, I don't know that you even need those. So you might be able to totally get rid of those and still deliver the poem, and that's really my only critique.
Don't you feel, though, if I just cut them, it would drastically change the meaning? The wounds of decades, the yoke of my self-imprisonment can be seen. The weight of disregard, the yoke of my fragile feelings can be felt, and yet, every so often, still free, still feeling, I shatter.
It depends, because what I got from it was the not for yous. The you that you're addressing is the person that you end up revolving around. So it almost became like a defensive thing because of the way it's put inside those. What are those called? What are those called, Guy?
The what?
Parenthèse, English, God.
No.
Parentheses.
Yeah, the parentheses.
Ah.
Because it's put in the parentheses, it kind of, for me, it retracts it a bit. Or it makes it have some underlying meaning. So for me, that underlying meaning became almost a defensive thing. Like you want this person to realize what you're saying in the stanzas next to it is not for them. And it's not for them because you want to be clear about it. It's almost like you say it because you have to say it, but you don't fully want the repercussions of them thinking it's for them. And I don't know if that was intended or not, but that's kind of how it read for me.
Mm-hmm. I am going to say one thing, because Daniel touched on it earlier. I don't believe in parentheses in poetry in general, because I believe mostly when you want to say something, you need to say something. And if you don't want to say something, you shouldn't say it in the poem. And most people who use parentheses use them to try and to eat their cake and still have it whole. But I'm someone who propagates this message, and yet I've chosen to use the parentheses. So I'm not going to answer if you are right, but you gave a potential reason of why I've used them. But one thing that I can tell you is that I did very much consider and plan the use of parentheses here, because I generally disagree with using parentheses in poetry. I think it's someone not saying what they want to say, unless that's, as you said, the message I'm trying to convey exactly. Anyone has editing critique to me? Besides this, because this was definitely editing critique.
Let me look to make sure. I just addressed nothing that I saw bothered me specifically, but I was mainly looking impressionistic.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I will touch on one thing that you did mention, but I used flesh twice in the same stanza, and I have to say that it bugged me, but there was simply no other thing I could have used. So
yeah, I mean, that's just one thing that bothers probably most writers about whatever language, especially English. There's just certain things I'm just like, please, can there be other terms like water? I want about 20 terms for water. Why is it
Hebrew
just flesh?
has a lot less words than English. So we consider English is actually considered a relatively rich language because it's stolen from French and from German,
because we
and,
have all the we
and from
have a lot of
Spanish.
things.
Yeah, because like here's a word. The word is ruach in Hebrew. That word, depending on connotation, can mean wind, spirit, soul, or ghost.
This is in the Kabbalah, isn't it?
No.
No?
They might use it. Again, like the Kabbalah is
Yeah.
just a system. It's not. There are no special Kabbalic words. It's a system of. It's a system. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just this is more of a general thing, but I feel that in your pieces, like in other people's pieces, we've talked that their lines are so long that they ought to just be cut in half. I feel in some of the pieces of yours that I've read that you could have less lines. But I know why you do it, so I understand it's very intentional. But it's like one of the results of it, if I had it in a book, this probably wouldn't be the case, but one of the results of it is when I was trying to figure out the second time that it said and yet, like I couldn't even see the other and yet because I was looking at the bottom half of the poem. And so it really spreads it out. And I think that's definitely something you're going for because there's sort of, your poems are so compact that they almost need some space to breathe.
I would say that like on this end, like every one of my poems is different in terms of shape and size.
It's true. I have seen the other ones that you write where they're
Like
longer.
I'm just going like to put it out there for a minute. Like here is one of the other poems I was considering sharing, just for you to see its form. Like I speak of how every like let lines be the length they should be, and I'm letting some things like be really long. And like here you see like how I have like this in the second stanza a random long line breaking. Like you would have cut that line in two, I know, because you would have wanted to keep the staircase going.
Where
I wail and
yeah.
ask them to deliver from me this bear.
I'm getting better with that, but those type of ones still really bug me. But in this context, it might not have because of the lines that are two above.
Yeah, no, I just shared it to make my point that like I don't come to a poem expecting a certain length. Like each poem of mine is different.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that so much of what you do is intentional because if I read a lot of the things that you were doing with punctuation and how short the lines are here in most poems, I wouldn't like it. Like on the fourth section where it says, and yet every so often without a touch, without a glance, these are all commas. My question would be, why is this not just one line with a bunch of commas? And normally it would come off weird that it was all commas. But here, because of how you structured it with the I shatter, just you, these being separate. And I do want to mention, I don't want to say too much on it because we already, went over it extensively, but like the not for you to me was weird. Like I understood it more once you asked some leading questions and I see it in the context of the piece, but like it comes to a more general question that I think is beyond the scope of what we're going to do today. But that's like, for instance, earlier, the ampersand that I added was quite intentional, and I've been avoiding it mostly because I mostly agree about not using it. But in that case, I really wanted to use it, and you stated that you also were very intentional about using these parentheses, even though you normally wouldn't. But it brings a question: is no matter how long you spend on being intentional on something, can you ever really get over the fact of the main association of how people see something?
No.
Like a parenthesis is a parenthesis. So does it actually matter how intentional you were wanting something? If someone is still going to see it?
That's a very good question. And my answer is twofold. First, on the general, you can't actually do it unless like people trust you to know what you are doing, and there is a question of trust. Like if you let's say you have a favorite movie director, and you rent a movie of theirs, and 30 minutes in you're saying this is shit. If it weren't your favorite director, you would often just stop the movie. But if it's your favorite director, or if people recommend it to you, then you trust that they will use it somewhere. Trusting the artists whose work you consume is very much a thing that is necessary for proper art appreciation, for the assumption that like you have to assume that like that if someone wrote something, it's not a typo, but they meant
Yeah.
that word. Like
It goes back to the gulf of ignorance.
yeah,
sort
like
of.
how I wrote yolk and yolk here, like the yolk of an egg, because I start with I've broken this shell, and like some people thought that I had a typo here, but it's definitely not a typo. And
Yeah.
the specific answer on parenthesis is it's like the word like, which I've mentioned in another class. The reason I don't like and parentheses is not is it's because they have a diminutive meaning, sort of. They sort of take away from the impact
Yeah.
of what you are trying to do. And usually you don't want it. Like, why write you are like the sun instead of write you are the sun? It's so much stronger to say it. But if you actually want to say you are like the sun, but not and then you write but not really, then like is the perfect thing here. And here I have to say the reason that
Exactly.
it's here in parentheses, it's in parentheses because I do want the diminutive meaning.
Yeah.
Like so
I
I generally don't like
I said,
yeah.
once you explained it clicked. It's just that
Yeah, so it's not
reading
that
it at first.
yeah, it's when I see parentheses or like I'm not saying this is bad immediately. It's just that I need to feel that they are actually intended, and I feel that usually they aren't.
And I agree, a diminutive and also can be in a sort of humorous context, especially if something is an overly weighty sort of topic. If you want to lighten it up or show a bit of humanity, there are uses for parentheses, but the point is that
It has to be
you need to
intentional.
understand what you're doing, not, like you said, using it. And that's a kind of a lifelong learning thing, I believe, especially like something like an M dash, for instance, which is not a conventional, like it is a conventional punctuation mark, but not at the same time. It is because it's one of the most common marks that people write informally, but since you're not by hand, writing by hand,
Yes.
but especially poets, but since it's not in a lot of academics, as far as unless you're studying something that uses it, then the danger is overusing it because you're not really clarifying to yourself why you're using it.
Yeah, and like I felt like Steve used it a bit too much today, for instance.
Okay,
Yeah.
two things.
Go ahead.
So you're saying that with the parenthèse that put in there is that basically it became a diminutive. So basically Steve was right. You're saying not for you because you partially want her to see it, but it's more the expression of worry that if she sees it, that she might think less of you. And then the
Also,
second,
also what Daniel said, or also of not wishing that she didn't have to see it, Yeah.
and then the second thing it was unrelated to the poem. It was going back to the ruach that you were saying. How does one then determine
Context.
which it is? Context. So what is like before or after it? All right.
Yeah, I put it like
Okay.
this. I'm going to write, like, you see this combination of letters, Mem, Samech, Pei, Reish in Hebrew. How many words can you write with these letters in Hebrew? Over 10. If you read them in a book, we don't use markings beyond like second grade that tell you how to read a word. Only the context. It could be a mispar, which is a number. It could be mesaper, which is telling a story. It could be mesaper in another meaning, which is giving a haircut. It could be מספר, which is from a book. It could be מספר, which means from a barber. And yeah, so Hebrew, if you are someone who reads Hebrew, you are expected to pay attention to the context.
But it must be like really interesting because like languages, they basically they create a mindset, right? I mean, they open basic so like your world changes the many languages you speak. So Hebrew mindset must be very like, it's hard if you have to like, I mean, okay, you have to watch it in one way, you have to really observe the people that you are around you to understand, what they're saying.
It's expected that you pay attention to people, and
right, but
one
on
second,
the other hand,
Tiger,
it's also limited,
Tiger,
right?
Tiger. Okay, so we have received notice that we need to end. I just want to thank everyone who shared a poem today. I want to thank Daniel for reading everyone's poem out loud, even though I read his, so also thanks to me. And thanks to everyone who gave critique, joined in, or is listening at home. I want to remind people again, leave critique, please. If people will keep not giving critique, I will sadly just cancel class, because even if you don't want to have a piece of yours critiqued, be a friend, leave critique. And even if you are just listening to the class and not joining, feel free to leave critique and link me either in the comment section or on Discord a poem you'd like us to go over in class, and we can do it. So have a nice evening, everyone.